Good evening. I'm Tricia Crowley, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Champaign County and the NAACP and the News Gazette, I welcome you to tonight's candidate forum. This portion of tonight's forum is candidates for Mayor of Urbana. The candidates are Rex Bradfield and Laurel Pressing. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for an opening statement. I will then ask questions submitted by the audience. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer these questions, and at the end, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. For you in the audience, we hope that you have questions for the candidates, and there are people who are circulating, who are distributing and collecting cards with your questions. By an earlier decision, Mrs. Pressing will begin with the opening comments.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, the News Gazette, and of course the City of Champaign for sponsoring this forum. I've been the mayor of Urbana for 8 years. I started out after graduating from college as an economist in the private sector, where I did short-term and long-term forecasting and worked on plant locations for major manufacturers. In government, I've been responsible for multi-million-dollar budgets. My experience has helped me solve problems after others have given up. In the midst of a great recession, Urbana cut crime 25% using a team approach. We used all tools available to the city and created new ones as needed. We kept our employees on the job while other cities slashed fire and police. I never gave up until we saved the Police Training Institute. We used $1.6 million in public investment to leverage triple that amount of private investment downtown. Common Ground Food Co-op's expansion, the restoration of the historic Urbana Hotel, and the renovation of Main Street buildings for new restaurants and creative space. We've brought dozens of new businesses to Urbana and will spend $5 million more on street work this year, all while carefully balancing the city budget. Urbana continues to attract new businesses to all commercial areas. Most of the space at the Pines now filled. A new Ruler's Grocery moving into the former Jerry's IGA. Lincoln Square, more businesses than ever. Gateway Shops at 5 Points, all new businesses. North of I-74, Soccer Planet, a highly successful new business. Michelle's Bridal, which started in Urbana, is now a regional retailer with a major renovation. Urbana has honest, effective government with active public participation. We're committed to respect and fairness for all people, and we continue to invest for the future. As mayor, I'm glad to be part of it.
Mr. Bradfield.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen and members sponsoring this forum, thank you for your kind invitation to this mayoral forum. 4 years ago, I discussed with you the issues which I believe needed your attention and my proposals for the city of Urbana moving forward and upward. And here we stand again discussing the same issues: jobs, development, taxes, and infrastructure. 4 years delay to recognize my ideas of 4 years ago is not leadership or ideas. It is a shameful waste of time. The time to act was 4 years ago, and it did not happen. I said 4 years ago that Urbana had a shortage of funds and was in deficit spending. They were supposedly flush with cash. Immediately after the election, the comptroller said we could only contribute a surplus of $500,000 to the general fund, and that was not enough. 3 months later, we were cutting services because of a shortage, and 7 months later, we went from a surplus to a deficit. 4 years ago, I said Menards would not develop in Urbana, and Urbana said it was going to happen. There is still no Menards. 4 years ago, I said $500,000 on beautifying Philo Road was a waste of money and would cause problems. Immediately after the election, Urbana spent the money, and now Philo is so difficult to travel and dangerous that both cars and bicycles avoid it. Additionally, the beautification hides pedestrians from view and places elderly using walkers and scooters in harm's way. I said 4 years ago, and it happened. Now I'm saying because of the lack of an administrative officer, the city not only mishandled the Ellis subdivision sewer situation, but the city wasted huge amounts of TIF money on the hotel in Boneyard Creek and will not see the benefit of that money or parlay that money into a larger tax base and job market. But most of all, we are again wasting time, and time is something we cannot be recovered. I'm the only candidate with a professional qualification to define and solve problems, and I again offer the voters of Urbana a mind, personality, and leadership quality that will benefit all and create jobs, development, and new creative ideas to make Urbana an exciting place to live and to work.
Thank you. First question for Mr. Bradfield. Do you think the City Council should review its use of force policy and to consider adopting a use of force policy involving progressive use of force to ensure that there is not excessive use of force?
Use of force is something that you see happen and get analyzed when you're not in the moment. I believe that when you're reviewing a use of force policy, you need to look at your eyes as though it were happening right at that point. I saw a movie at one time where someone was saying, well, he didn't think about it, and the attorney pulled a gun in the guy's face and put it right on him, and he goes, oh my goodness. At that point, the use of force became very obvious that this is real trouble. So I think the city should be very careful about how they review those things, but I think they should review them at any suggestion from the citizens. It is something that cannot be overlooked and must be adhered to.
Mrs. Pressing.
Well, I think Urbana has a very good policy with regard to how the police use weapons, and I think our track record is excellent. So we also have initiated a civilian review board for the police. We're one of the few cities in Illinois that has such a system, and there have been very few complaints against our police because the civilian review board acts as an appellate function if the person who complains about a police officer's actions is not satisfied with how the chief of police handles it. So I think that Urbana has a very good system, and I think our police department is excellent.
Next question. Some state officials want to drastically cut funds that go to municipalities. What will you do to address this challenge? Mrs. Pressing.
Well, I know that the state is in a very bad financial shape, and my proposal is that we need to work with the state. If they do need money, and they're proposing to take some of the income tax increase away from cities. Cities have gone through the major recession in this country, and they've been hurt financially. But I think cities have done a much better job of budgeting than the state. So I think what we should do is work with the state. If they're going to take some of our money, they should ease up on some of the restrictions that they have that create untenable demands on our resources. These are unfunded mandates, and I think that would be a fair trade.
Mr. Bradfield.
I have a real problem with the state mandating things that cities or citizens have to do and not providing any funding for it. The state got themselves in that position, and they have people in there who sought to seek election to solve those problems that they have. To pass that along to the cities who actually had nothing to do with it, and we are entitled to those monies that they are proposing that we hold or they hold at a level of 2012, I don't think is correct. I think that the state should go ahead and give the cities their obligation and give the cities the chance to use those monies to develop jobs, to develop developments, to encourage people to come along and increase the tax base at that point. The cities do a better job of creating jobs than the state ever thought of, and I think the money would be better spent in the cities than at the state level. I do not agree with cutting back or holding those costs.
Do you think that Urbana should continue funding social service agencies, and what other ideas do you have in addressing the needs of the lowest income people in the community? Mr. Bradfield.
One problem I have with social service places that we send our money is we don't get to look at their books and know exactly what they spend. We can ask for it, but are we getting it? Does it take too much time to do it? I think you have to be very careful in the way that you spend those monies. If you are spending something on a social service, is that something that the city could handle better by creating a department for that particular social service that's needed? It's always best if public funds are spent by people who are responsible to the public rather than spent by people who are working for an agency that is nonprofit or whatever it may be. Are they necessary? Absolutely necessary. But those funds should also be spent in trying to help people get out from under what's causing their need. Spend money to get people more excited about being themselves, about finding jobs, about helping themselves rather than just giving them money.
Mrs. Pressing?
I would not be in favor of creating city departments to replace the social service agencies that work in Champaign County. I think that would be a huge mistake. Urbana has been supporting the social service agencies because we think that what they do for the people in this community is vital. And I know Champaign has taken a slightly different tack. So I would like to see Champaign share some of the burden of helping these agencies because they do use it to get matching money. And I think we can't afford to let the agencies not be able to serve the public. One thing that the Urbana City Council is interested in is promoting early childhood education for the children who are currently on the waiting list for the school district programs and for Head Start. And I think there is a lot of information available that shows that children who fall behind by the time they're 3 years old are going to be behind for the rest of their life. So I think this is something that we really do need to concentrate on.
All right, next question. Can you provide an example of a difficult problem that you have resolved and tell us how you resolved it, Mrs. Pressing?
Well, I think the biggest problem that we had to come to grips with was the recession. And I early on set a goal that we should try to keep our employees if at all possible. I worked with the city council and with the staff, and we came up with ways to reduce the budget in areas that we felt were the least productive. And we also came up with new sources of revenue. My chief of staff surveyed what other cities were doing, and so we made some modest increases in our revenue sources. We also took a calculated decision that we were going to draw down our reserves because this is for a rainy day, and I can tell you that the Great Recession, the biggest one since the Great Depression, was a rainy day. And so I'm glad that we used our reserves to keep our employees. We did not let go the people who are protecting the public in Urbana. We kept the firefighters and the police officers on the job and our other employees as well.
Mr. Bradfield?
Well, recently I got involved with a city problem in the Ellis subdivision with the sanitary sewer connections. Problem solving is something where you first must identify what's the problem. Then the second part of problem solving is identifying what solutions are already available and making sure that they are being used. If they're not being used, find out why. In this case, I found that the city ordinances already contained the answer, and it did not involve any monetary considerations whatsoever. It just required combining the ordinances. Doing that, it became obvious that a solution was available that the city council was obviously interested in when we presented it, and I felt like it was a seamless way and an easy way to solve a problem that was a very serious problem for not only that subdivision, but also for everybody in Urbana.
Next question. IDOT traffic stop data for the last 8 years continues to document that African American drivers in Urbana are stopped 2.5 times their percentage as members of the driving public. They're stopped 35% of the stops versus 14% of the driving public. In spite of recent city efforts, including officer diversity training to address this problem, the most recent data has shown no improvements. And this is a multi-part question, so I'm going to read all 3 parts, and then we'll do them, I think, one at a time. Why do you think this racial disparity continues to plague our minority community? What new initiatives would you propose to address and eliminate this racial disparity? And finally, if community groups ask to join the city in addressing this problem, will you welcome them and give them a seat at the table? So, Mr. Bradfield, we'll start with, why do you think this racial disparity continues to plague our minority community?
Well, the first thing that you'd have to look at is, what was the reason for the stop? Was the stop for usual traffic violations, speeding, or illegal use of lanes, or something that everybody does? If that's the case, it would seem unusual that a particular minority did it more often than the other drivers. So I would look at that as saying, this does look like it's a problem. Once you've identified what the problem is, I think it becomes necessary to question those who are actually involved in it, both the police officers and the citizens. Once you do that, you can formulate as to what's going on. I find it very surprising that it goes on, and even more so, I find it very disappointing that those figures exist.
What new initiatives would you propose to address and eliminate this racial disparity? Mr. Bradfield.
Is that mine?
Yeah.
Okay. Say it again.
What new initiatives would you propose to address and eliminate this racial disparity?
First and foremost, I would speak with the police chief and the officers and find out what's on their mind and why it is happening. Once you have determined what the view of those who have taken the sworn oath in the city have determined to be the problem, then I would hold public forums so that we could find out those who were getting stopped. What is their view of why they got stopped? And I think combining those two things would be a very reasonable way to try and formulate what the solution is, because you're going to get both sides of the problem. And that's what you need to look for, is what's going on, why is it going on, and who knows about it.
Finally, if community groups ask to join the city in addressing this problem, will you welcome them and give them a seat at the table?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It is so important that the community get involved, because there are 7 members that are elected. They can't be expected to know everything. And if they do think that they know everything, that's a problem. But the community will give everybody something to think about. You will see the whole melting pot before it gets stirred up, and that is so important to get the community involved. You cannot hide things from the community. You demand that they come in, and make it easy for them to come in and do it. Make the doors always be open. And if you find out that some city official or somebody that's taken the oath is trying to prevent that, then address that, and address it immediately.
Mrs. Pressing, I can read the whole question from the beginning, or just start with the immediate questions?
I think that you should read the whole question, please.
Okay. The IDOT traffic stop data for the last 8 years continues to document that African-American drivers in Urbana are stopped 2.5 times their proportion as a member of the driving public, 35% versus 14%. In spite of recent city efforts, including officer diversity training to address this problem, the most recent data has shown no improvements. Number one, why do you think this racial disparity continues to plague our minority community?
Well, first of all, Urbana has looked at this in great depth, and there are problems with the statistics, I believe. All the other indications show that Urbana has very good officer training and very good community relations with the minority community, better than other governments in this area. So if you had a thermometer and it showed that your temperature was 106 and you felt fine, would you think that you should rush to the emergency room, or would you think that there might be something wrong with the measuring device? And I think that's what we have here. We've had forums on this. We've had experts from Northwestern University, and I think we've kind of beat this thing to death. And there are statistical reasons why that particular measure shows what it does. But I don't think it means that the Urbana Police Department is deliberately stopping minority drivers.
What new initiatives would you propose to address and eliminate this racial disparity?
Well, as I said, I think it's a question of what is the measuring device, because we have had forums on this. We've had open discussions at the Civilian Review Board. We've had discussions at the City Council. And I think that somebody who doesn't understand how the statistics are put together and how different police departments report things differently might come away with a wrong impression.
Finally, if community groups ask to join the city in addressing this problem, will you welcome them and give them a seat at the table?
I think we have already opened it up for community discussion, and you can only talk about something for so long, and I'm sorry if some people aren't convinced that their view is right, but I think we have given it a very thorough discussion.
All right. Next question. How will you promote business and economic development in Urbana over the next 4 years? Mrs. Pressing.
Well, we encourage business development. We welcome it. And I think you've seen that even during a great recession, Urbana has continued to add new businesses in every commercial part of the city. So we are interested in promoting businesses. We talk regularly with Menards. They had it's a family-owned company, and they weren't expanding during the recession, but they're still interested in the project. So we have some projects that take a long time before they'll get off the ground, or the ground will start being dug up. And we are actively engaged in promoting businesses, and I think you see the results.
Mr. Bradfield.
I would form an ad hoc committee of city, university, state officials, developers, designer, contractors, bankers, and investors to visit and attract major companies to Urbana. I would review and make necessary changes to Urbana development codes to allow the less costly development of businesses in the city. I would develop an Urbana Technical Research Park on Lincoln Avenue. I would work with Menards to complete the development on Route 130. I would look at making Lincoln Square a high-rise office complex with a mall down below to vitalize downtown. It is imperative that something happen at Lincoln Square. I would attract national food restaurants such as maybe the Golden Corral to southeast Urbana to keep people in that area, which would entice people to fill those strip malls. The people are there eating, give them something to look at after they eat. And I would try and move the fairgrounds to a horse track, fairgrounds, sports complex on North Lincoln Avenue. But above all, I would make Urbana business friendly. The door would always be open, and if you've got an idea to develop in Urbana, I'm interested.
Okay, next question. What will be your strategy for working cooperatively with council members of both parties? Mr. Bradfield.
I don't think that I will have a problem with it, and the proof of that is I was denied the opportunity to present some information to the city along with an attorney, and when I got the opportunity to present that information, 4 out of the 6 council members who heard it expressed that they were very interested in what happened. Good ideas falling on good people and good brains. The Urbana City Council is very smart, and what they need is leadership to get them going to the ideas that really will make Urbana a very nice place to live and ease the problems that we have now. I have great faith in the City Council. I think it's a great City Council.
Mrs. Pressing.
What was the question again?
What will be your strategy for working cooperatively with council members of both parties?
Well, I think that I have worked cooperatively with the City Council to an extent that the 2 mayors before me had a terrible relationship with the council, and I have a very good working relationship with them. The first thing I did on the county board, for example, they have a Democratic caucus and a Republican caucus. Well, we only had 1 Republican, so I thought there's no point in having a caucus for the Democrats. So we invited our Republican member, Heather Stevenson, and she's always been included in all the discussions, and there doesn't seem to be frequently a partisan breakdown on issues. I talk with council members individually, and before I propose something, I run it by them individually to get their ideas, and I think that's just the start of the process. Once it gets to the council, there's open discussion. We involve the public. We have a lot of advisory boards to the council, some of which I've created, including Neighborhood Safety Task Force. So I think that I've done a very good job of working with the council, regardless of political party.
Okay, next question. Should the office of mayor be limited to 2 terms?
Well,
Mrs.
obviously,
Pressing.
I don't think so. I think that term limits is a fad that was started a few years ago, and some of the people who ran for Congress and said they were going to just serve for a certain number of terms decided that, after all, seniority was worth something. So let the voters decide. If I think I've done a good job. I think most voters think I've done a good job, and the mayors who served before me certainly served more than 2 terms. So I see no reason to limit a mayor to 2 terms. I think it should be up to the voters.
Mr. Bradfield.
It's a 2-part answer. The first one is, I think three terms would probably be proper if and only if the districts remain to be partisan districts where one party or another at a particular time could form the districts. If you had nonpartisan districts where people who are serving in the office of the mayor, if they make some mistakes that irritate some people and just a few voters would switch their votes, then they would be out. If the districts were nonpartisan districts, I would say no term limits. But if they're partisan districts, absolutely. But I think it takes 3 terms for a good person to get things to the point where they can turn over the reins.
Okay. And here's our final question, if the audience has any more questions. Okay, we do have a couple more questions, but this one is, what experiences have you had that qualifies you to be the mayor? Mr. Bradfield.
I've spent my entire life solving problems. As a professional engineer, every time somebody uses my services, I solve a problem. I've never gone to work at any time not wanting to go to work because I didn't like solving problems. I see the public forum of being a mayor as being something that is very difficult, but would be so rewarding to be able to use those skills that I've developed over the 40 years to help solve the largest problems or solve the smallest problems. It wouldn't make any difference to me whether somebody was walking in saying my neighbor's fence is out of place or somebody was walking in saying Menards is not going to locate here. I just accept the challenge, and that's what I want. I want to accept the challenge of being mayor.
Would you repeat the question,
Yeah.
please?
What experiences have you had that qualifies you to be mayor?
Well, I've been the mayor. I would think that would be the biggest qualification. I outlined my biography before. I'm an economist. I've served on the county board. I've served as county auditor. I've served in the legislature. And all these experiences taught me a lot. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've been able to do a good job as mayor. And I'm certainly interested in the job. I find it a real education, and I find it fascinating to learn from the discussions that we have with the council members, the staff, and the public.
Okay. Was the investment in Olympian Drive worth it? What about potential development versus the possibility of sprawl? Mrs. Pressing.
Well, this is a project that has been in the works for a couple of decades, and you can't just build a road just exactly when you think you need it. This is part of a long-term planning process that Champaign County uses, the Champaign-Urbana Urban Area Transportation Study, QOTS, and the investment, actually, the money to build the road is all coming from state and federal funds, so there has been no local money that's going into it. And I think maybe the best argument is that the people who have been in opposition to it have now started saying that it's a great project, but they just don't want it now. And I think after the years that we've spent lining up this money, it would be foolish to say to put it off. And it's also been through the county board and the Urbana City Council, and it's already been built in the Champaign portion, so I think we should finish it.
Mr. Bradfield.
I view Olympian Drive as the Windsor Road to the north. I think it's imperative that Champaign-Urbana be connected on the north. It served Windsor Road well. It will serve Champaign-Urbana well. The problem that I have with Olympia Drive and the extension of Lincoln Avenue is I think they should all occur at the same time. Lincoln Avenue being extended before Olympian Drive gets over to Route 45 makes Lincoln Avenue a road to nowhere. Nobody is going to go to Marketplace by driving across the interstate and then going north for 2.5 miles and west 1.5 miles to get to Marketplace. When a government body decides to do something like Lincoln Avenue, along with that has to be development plans. And I've mentioned a couple of development plans in here of getting a research park and a sports complex, racetrack, fairgrounds on North Lincoln Avenue. North Lincoln Avenue is necessary right now to the point where the businesses up there, the truck traffic is dangerous. No roundabouts.
Okay. Is it better to use TIF funds for business subsidies or for infrastructure improvements? Mr. Bradfield.
TIF funds are funds that are intended to leverage public money into public good. It's a parlay job that if you can parlay, say, $100,000 into a business that is eventually a $1 million business, you've parlayed your money 10 times over, you've created jobs, you've created a tax base increase, you've created excitement in there. I think TIF funds should be used for business development. They should not be used for development of infrastructure unless the businesses are flourishing. And a prime example of that is the Boneyard Creek funding is way out of order. It may be necessary at a future time, but now is not the time, and you cannot recover those funds, and you cannot recover the time that you're going to lose because you don't have those funds. It's a mistake to use them in the fashion of the Boneyard Creek.
Mrs. Pressing.
Well, TIFs were set up to encourage development, and certainly you can't have development unless you have infrastructure. So Urbana uses TIF money for both, and I think that makes sense as an economist. I think it's foolish to say that you're only going to invest in businesses and not invest in the streets and the sewers and all the other things that a business needs to even get started. And I think that the money invested in the Boneyard is something that's been in the works for a long time. It's gotten a lot of public discussion, and I think the businesses that are located there are very strongly in favor of it.
Okay. And this is our final question. Is that right? No? One more, but okay. They
Wait a
keep
minute,
coming.
I just have one answer left, so choose a question.
Okay. This one is a pretty broad question, and
no.
so I'll start with how would you prioritize the needs of the city? What should be the priorities of the needs? Mrs. Pressing.
Well, we go through this every year. We do a budget every year, and we're updating things during the year. The city council sits down with me, and we go over the goals of the city. That was the first thing I did when I got elected mayor. We spent the whole first summer discussing our goals. So the priorities can change from time to time. What is the most immediate need? I think we'll be adding how we can help on early childhood education and youth employment, because there is a huge poverty problem in this country that is growing, and this community is not exempt. And I think we have to deal with that because that's our future. So setting priorities is what government is all about, and I think Urbana has done a very good job of it. And our top priority is public safety, and I think you can see the way we've lowered the crime rates. Even though the population is higher, we have fewer crimes than we did 8 years ago, and I think that shows that we are succeeding in meeting our goals.
Mr. Bradfield.
We got asked that on another candidate thing that we had to fill out, and I had 3 items that I thought the Urbana, if I'm elected mayor, that we would consider immediately. The first one is Windsor Road. As an engineer, I can tell you Windsor Road has cancer and it's incurable. Windsor Road is vitally important to Myers, who is a huge source of revenue for the city of Urbana. They must be repaired. It must be repaired because if you damage the traffic flow to Myers, people will stop going there. They'll go to wherever they're doing while the road is being repaired or is continuing in disrepair. The infrastructure of the entire city should be high priority because it's not so good now. We've spent money elsewhere. And as far as crime, there's a fire station in southeast Urbana. I would trade some city property for that lot next to it, turn it into a police satellite station, fire station with the modern building so that it's easy to operate, efficient to operate, and that way you have a police presence out there to protect all the businesses in that part of Urbana.
Okay. And this is, in fact, our final question. I don't care if they give me any more. It's going to be our final question. So what is the status of the UC2B cable coming to the Urbana, Philo Road, Harding Street area? Mr. Bradfield.
To be honest with you, I do not know what the status of that part of the cable is, but I will mention in that earlier I said that I would like to have a technical research park on North Lincoln Avenue. I think that research park can use the cable that is now going to be serving the Carl complex up there and just take the fairgrounds and move it north. It would be a perfect opportunity to get something similar to what Champaign has, only we would sell the lots up there. We would not lease them. Research Park in Champaign is federal land, and it cannot be sold. It's treaty land. So I would like to see Urbana use all the resources of the University of Illinois and the cable and everything that's in place and develop our own research park. I do not have an answer for the question that you had.
Mrs. Pressing?
Well, I'm sure we have a map that would explain that on our website. What we did was build the rings first, and then we're working on the way that we can extend high-speed internet to all the city, every home in the city. The top priority with the federal grant was certain underserved areas, and so we're completing that, and we're still working out how we're going to do the rest of the city, but I think it's going to be a very big advantage to the cities and the university to have this system completed.
Okay. We're coming to the closing comments here, and each of the candidates will have 2 minutes for a closing statement, and we begin with Mrs. Pressing.
Who is the best choice to head a government? It's essential to know what training and experience someone has and how they perform under difficult circumstances. I've been mayor of Urbana for 8 years. During that time, I've demonstrated a respect for individuals and the democratic process, the ability to work with the City Council and the public in discussing the best course of action for the city. We have come through some very tough times. We have dealt with all our problems in an open, honest way, and the City of Urbana has continued to move forward despite the challenges. My background as an economist, county board member, county auditor, and state legislator gives me the ability to tackle tough times and keep working out good solutions. My greatest accomplishment, establishing a healthy working relationship with the City Council, something that was sorely missing in the 28 years before I became mayor. Urbana has a great City Council and an excellent staff. We manage your tax dollars wisely. We plan for the future. We are committed to fairness and respect for all people. We are committed to creating jobs for families and dealing with issues of poverty and crime. I appreciate the faith Urbana voters put in me in electing me mayor. The work can be difficult, but as any mayor can tell you, we like the job because we can actually get things done. That is what voters want. Reasonable discussion, people who represent them asking good questions and understanding the options before making a decision. If you can find a city with a better government than Urbana, I would like to know about it. We have an election coming up on April 9th. I would very much appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Bradfield.
Thank you. So now we've heard the questions and the answers, and the time is nearing to make a choice. As I've said, I propose to form ad hoc committees. I want to do things on North Lincoln Avenue that have never been suggested. I want to do things in Southeast Urbana that have never been suggested. All these things are things that will help Urbana become someplace that we can remain a bedroom community and still be excited about the fact that we're not just supporting ourselves on our taxes. We need to be able to support ourselves on business development. I will protect those who choose to invest in Urbana by going and making a police station in the areas that they want to develop. I also will take the areas that are experiencing crime and talk with those developers and talk with the people in that area and find solutions to crime rather than clubbing crime to death. I'd like to create an annual cultural celebration of ethnic groups to show their music, attire, food, and bring all the communities together. I'd like to form a help desk in the city with multiple languages for those who need help with immigration rules or help just settling in the community. I would like to develop a Northern Urbana Neighborhood Association to help that area have a stronger voice in Urbana. Does that sound ambitious? It is ambitious, and I love ambition. We can do it, and I mean we, as Urbana, can do it only if I'm elected. Let's not waste 4 more years. Elect a fellow that has spent his entire life solving problems. I thank you for your vote on April the 9th and encourage everyone to go vote early if you want to. And on a side note, to all of you who are here, my wife and I recently lost our son to an automobile accident. Any of you who are here, anytime you see your kids, you visit your kids, you go hug them and love every moment of it.
Thank you. I'd like to remind the audience, I'm sure you want to see this again on cable TV, but especially for your friends and neighbors, it's easily accessible. Check the schedule out on the city websites. It's also on the city websites, there's a link to YouTube, so you can watch any of the debates individually at any time on YouTube. Okay, thank you very much.